Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
So welcome. This is Jerry Teo from the Healing Generations Institute, and on behalf of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders, we want to welcome you to another episode of the Healing Generations podcast. And we come in attempts to really bring the medicine of the generations of people of all races and all colors together, but at the same time recognizing that we have generations of trauma that we need to heal. And so part of that legacy is focusing on that healing. And so we want to begin today just giving thanks to Creator and to the ancestors, to all of ancestors, to your ancestors, and recognize the land in which we sit on and where you're sitting as well. We acknowledge the original people from there, but acknowledge your community, your family, as we acknowledge each other in the way that it should be, in a sacred way, in a respectful and dignified way. And that's part of the healing. And that's part of the acknowledgement as well. And we come today reflecting on some 4 years of recording these podcasts, and have chosen to reach back and listen and reflect on the teachings of Maestra Concha Saucedo, who I had the pleasure of interviewing a number of years ago in 2020. And the wisdom and the knowledge and the joy and the teachings that she shared were so profound that we felt it was very important for us to replay them and re-listen to them. Listening to those elders, they tell those same stories sometimes, but every time you listen to them, they're a little bit different and ring a little bit different. And so there was a double episode that we did with her, and we will replay this now for you, and hopefully this will be something that can resonate and you can hear, and it's really pertinent for today. So we welcome Maestra Concha Saucedo sharing her teachings and her wisdom, and we invite you to listen in a good way so that we can bring that healing to the generations that we need.
We're very blessed today to be able to listen to the teachings and counsel of La Maestra Concha Saucedo. La Maestra is a PhD psychologist. She's also a wisdom keeper, a healer, an icon in our community. Has been trailblazing for many, many years and advocating for the dignity and respect of our traditional ways, of our indigenous ways, but also for the respect of the generations of medicine that we carry and that all indigenous people carry. Maestra Concha was one of the first PhD psychologists, and especially as a female, a Chicana, really opened the way for a lot of us that knew in our spirits that we had something to give, and that we carried something in our tradition, but didn't know how to articulate that. La Maestra began then talking about the concept of la cultura cura, or that culture that cures, or that healing medicine that all indigenous people, all people of color carry within them. And so she brings those teachings to us today. I was very blessed to be able to spend some time with her and interview her and have a dialogue and listen to the history that she had to walk, the struggles that she had to get through, but also the counsel of what helped her get through and what kept her on that path. And I think it's very pertinent for today, in this time in which we're in the middle of a pandemic for COVID-19, in which it causes us to shelter in place. So we've had to kind of hunker down with our families and even go inside individually. It's challenged us to get closer to those things that are significant to us and to really reassess, what's important in our lives. The other pandemic, though, that is facing us is the pandemic of racism that for people of color been facing for 500 years, but it's now again raised its head, something that many of us have been struggling with and have been advocating against for for many generations. And we hear in Concha's, Maestra Concha's story about how long that legacy and even how far it goes back. So I was very blessed to really have this interview, whether it's going to be broken into two parts. This first one, she talks about history, and she talks about culture, and she talks about those teachings that come along the way as we move on this journey of healing generations. Let's listen to Maestra.
Thank you, Jerry. First of all, I want to thank my ancestors, all the tatas that came before me, and all those teachers around me. And I want to thank you also, because I know your work and the good works that you have done, so that if I helped in any way, I'm thankful for that. And you asked a question, who am I? Now, that's a difficult question to answer, but I'll start with, first of all, I'm the daughter of Carlos and Rosa. Parents who saw something in me and nourished it. And so much of what I do now is really what they taught me. And one of the things that my father used to say to all of us, and we were girls that grew up, the boys in the family had died, and he said, if you have any talent, you must use it not only for yourself, but for others. So that has always been a kind of a guiding light of thinking, is this just for me, or is it really for other people as well? And that if I have some talent and some brain, then I need to utilize it in such a way that it grows and expands and can help other people grow and expand. So I think in some ways that's the essence of me, that I truly can say I love people, human beings of all colors, of all genders. And I guess I was taught to serve. People say, well, what does that mean? That you're giving yourself to others? Well, yes, in order to help the others become who they can become. And what else? What else am I? Who else am I? A person that loves to laugh. I think that's a healing. I love good stories. I like making bromas on people and people on me. I think I'm musical. I love rhythms and movement, and song, because all of life is movement. All of life is movement. And right now, these days that we're living in 2020, there's a lot of movement. And with movement, I think I've learned one has to be careful. If you're not careful, you stumble and fall. I would break my hip and I would be done, right? So I think I'm all of those things that make a human being. And it really all stems from my ancestors, all the way back, through my parents and through my sisters. I'm the youngest, and I felt I was always pushed around, and I thought they were bullies, but they weren't. But being the youngest, I learned how to negotiate, because the same with cousins, I was always the youngest. So then it means you have to learn how to move through that maze of, older people. And what else am I? I like to think of myself, and I don't like these terms, but I think I have an open heart. But I also have an open mind and an intellect, and I like to use it. I like to think, and not just think, but reflect, particularly at this time. I'll say my age now. I'm 85 years old. Some people say I'm this young. No, I'm old. And I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be 85 and in relatively in good health, and that I can laugh. I can laugh at myself. I'm a person that doesn't have regrets. I can look back and say, yes, I made that mistake. I made that error, and I have made plenty. But ¿Qué puedo hacer? It's done. I'm not going to do the same thing again. But living with regret to me seems like a waste of time. The other thing is a waste of time is worrying. Why worry? You can use that time to try to resolve what you're worrying about, or to recognize that maybe it doesn't have a resolution and let it drop to the side. But, when I work with people, I say, hey, you're just wasting your time worrying. The same as wasting your time complaining unless you take an action. I learned to be a person of action, watching my father. And my mother and father were immigrants, but they came here in 1927. At that time in Mexico, there was a Cristero movement. And my father, and it was a movement with guns and everything. And my father was involved in that, very much so. And my mother and father weren't married yet. But she had a good friend in the government, in the revolutionary government, who said, you better tell tu novio that he and his family better leave now because they're on a list to be removed. So he and his family left immediately. And they had compadres up here in Sacramento and in San Francisco. And then my mother followed. Her brothers wouldn't accompany her to La Frontera. And she said, well, I'm going anyway, whether you accompany me or not. And so then they gave in. She got married by proxy, right, in Texas. And then, so he had that strong of faith and a man of action. So when he was here, he used to work a lot with, there was a band of priests who were social action, social justice priests, and they worked with los campesinos. So I was the youngest, and so I wasn't in school always, so I would go with my father when he was helping organize and preaching, because he was very Catholic. And I think I learned from that, and from my mother as well. And one of the things I learned, I never heard her complain. I never heard her. And she had left all her family. She didn't see, and she had 8 brothers and sisters, and she left all of them behind, and she didn't see her mother for 30 years. Because in those days, everybody was poor. They were poor there, and they were poor here. But she did a wonderful thing. She kept us connected to Mexico. We would send magazines that they liked, and we would write on the margins of the magazine, or we would put things that we had made, and we would write to my abuelita. And for years, I thought that was my abuelita's name, because it said, abuelita, right abuelita, right abuelita. Later, I found out that my abuelita's name was Rosa, as was my mother's. And I think there's another aspect to me, is that the lineage, the native lineage is Yaqui. And, the Yaquis never gave up. They could never be put down. So I think that strength comes through. I believe in cultural DNA. It's there. So all of those things, to answer your question, I think all of those things make me me.
Very powerful words. And it took me back to growing up in my family too. One of the powerful things that she mentioned was talking about her father and how her father had to move because he was on a list. He was on a list to be tortured, to be violated, to probably be killed. And, it reminds me of how this has been going on for a long time, as many of our, African-American brothers, definitely, and many people of color as well, feel like they're on a list to be disrespected, to be violated, and to be killed. We saw that with Mr. George Floyd. And so, Maestra reminds us that this struggle has been going on for a long time. But she also shares the teaching of, why be worried? Why complain if you're not going to take action? And so she gives us that counsel of that we can dialogue about something, we can complain about something, we can worry about something, but if we're not going to take action, then what good is it? Why should we use our energy that way? And she began then also sharing about in her process of living in this country, of living in this society, the impact that it had on confusing her about who she was and who she is, and if she had value or had any type of worth or voice. And it caused her to go back to Mexico, her village, and search out her own identity. And that she went to a curandera, a healer, traditional healer. And the healer asked her, well, so what do you want? And she says, well, I'm looking for my voice. I'm looking for my purpose. And the healer says, oh, you need to be healed. He says that was very profound to her because she didn't realize that the reason why she couldn't find her voice and she didn't know her purpose is because of all the generational trauma, the oppression, the misguided words, and the inequity and all the racism that now had been internalized in her. And so she talks about the importance of social justice really requires the need to know yourself, to know your purpose, and to be connected, to really be connected to who you are as a people, who you are, and know the worth that you carry and that your people carry and the medicine that you carry. But it's a journey. And in this next segment, she talks about, some of those struggles, some of the things that she had to confront and stand up for. So let's continue to listen to the maestra.
How did I find myself with it? Well, I went to Catholic schools and very good education on one side, but all the prejudices of white nuns, class prejudice as well as racial prejudice. And so I always felt like I didn't belong there and that there was something wrong with the way they treated me and the few others of me that were there. And, that stayed with me. And at that time, I was also a person that did not talk a lot. And you were taught to respect those elders, so you didn't mouth off to the nun, to the sister. And so then in college, I began to see, well, maybe I need to speak up. Certain things happen in college. And I went to College of Notre Dame in Belmont, and I ran for the president of the resident students. And I think there was one other Chicana, and then people from Central America, but wealthy, and then one black person. But all the others were white, but they wanted me to run. And the sister, one of the sisters who was head of that part of the convent, came to me and said, I don't think you should run. I kind of go like, she says, well, you don't talk enough. I go, oh, to myself. But it made me very angry, because I knew it was about something else, a number of things. She had another girl that she favored, and she didn't think I would be able to do it. That was the bottom line. And I went and hid and cried. I would never cry in front of them. And you know who the them are. But I won. I won the election. And I learned to talk. Well, the thing was, everybody talked a lot. And in like a meeting. And I would listen to them and say, well, why is she saying that? That's already been said twice. There was that need to talk so you could be seen. And I don't think I had that need. And my family we didn't all just talk a lot. You were there present with people. So how is that connected to the question? So I think I began to form an idea of righting wrongs, right? And now, this is a little aside, but it's related. When I was about 7 or 8, we lived in the country, Niles, which is part of South Alameda County, and I formed a mystery club. We were going to solve mysteries. We'd cut out of the newspaper, and I love reading mystery stories, but that idea that there is some wrong out there that I could somehow help to make right, that was kind of forming. And And I had a lot of kinds of experiences, and saw what was happening. And at some point, we worked in the fields, so you experienced that. And, at that time, they would sell you water. You couldn't drink water, and there were no toilets, and, all of that. All of that began like simmering within me, taking heat. And then, and this has to go back a little bit, I had rheumatic fever when I was 10 and nearly died. And, those experiences create a change in you. And on my 10th birthday, they dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. And my father took me aside and said, that is immoral. What they have done, that's immoral. And do you understand why? I said, yes, but I didn't understand why. And it was a number of things, because he was a peace person, but it was also why it was dropped on the Japanese, the racial undertone. So, all of those things just sit in you. And so when I graduated, and I graduated young from college, it was the peace movement was happening. And so I became involved with Ban the Bomb and people working for peace. And then that was a quick leap to working for Chicanos, because then I went and moved to Gilroy, which was very much country then. And half the population were Mexicanos, campesinos, and the other half were the white people that owned the land. And I was the first Chicana teacher that they had. And my field was history, but they said, no, you teach Spanish. Because, and this is the kind of the misogyny, because all the men taught like the social studies classes, and the women taught English and languages. And then in the business department, it was mixed. So all of these things are happening, and I'm young, I'm 20, I'm 21, and experiencing these things. And then I just saw so many things and experienced so many things there. And then I got married, and then we began organizing among the migrant workers. Because at that time, and people think it's bad now, that time they were literally living in chicken coops, right, without cleaning out the chicken coop. Right, so I used to go and do puppet shows with the children. And so, all of those things. And then at that time was the beginning of Cesar Chavez. And a little before that, I had gotten involved with civil rights movement with African Americans. And then so it was a kind of a growth process that happened, and transition. And I didn't understand it at that time. I knew at one point I had to leave my husband and go on the trek from Delano to Sacramento for that Easter way back. And all I knew at that time to say was, I have to do this. Because I began feeling that going through college and having a certain education was separating me from who I truly was. And so I had to be there. And that began the process again of reconnecting with my roots. Because for a time, I became a socialist. Well, now I am still, but a democratic socialist. But I was more a socialist, communist. And I left the Catholic Church and the institutional church. And I was married to a man who was a sociologist and very intellectual, and all his friends. And it's the Vietnam War, and they're having intellectual discussions about the war. And I'm going, what is wrong with you? That war is wrong, period. And so that, it's a process that happens to one. And I was never afraid of action. And I had been trained with CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, and the NAACP around peaceful methods of resisting. And so it fit with everything else. And so little by little by little by little, I became involved in what we call the Chicano movement. and then returning to my own roots, going to Mexico, to Oaxaca. I went to Oaxaca for 20 years and connected with a woman there, Doña Amparo, who taught me many things, particularly about spirituality and the healing practices. So when going back, people were having intellectual discussions about the war. I realized that there was like no spirit connected to people, and that I felt I had lost that spiritual connection. And so part of going back to Mexico, and particularly to Oaxaca, I kept saying when I met Doña Amparo, who facilitated sacred mushroom ceremonies, I came to find my voice. And yeah, I used to like to sing, and I thought maybe that's what I'm talking about. And she says, vino para una curación. He came for a healing. And that's what I had come. And so then that opened up the door.
Wow, some very powerful words. As she says, I knew it wasn't right, and I knew that I had to be part of righting the wrongs, but that it was painful, so painful that when she was told that, she wasn't smart enough or didn't have a loud enough voice or didn't speak up enough, that she didn't let it stop her, but it caused her to cry. But she went off to the side to cry. She says, I would never cry in front of them. And how many of us do our hearts cry inside when even we walk in a room and recognize we're not wanted or we're not seen in our educational systems or history or on TV? And more importantly, when we don't feel safe in our communities and don't feel represented by those people who are supposed to represent us. And at the other end, where we feel targeted, that we're going to get hurt or killed, or that our children, don't feel safe. And as a father and as a grandfather, I worry about my children, and having discussions with the babas, and the our African-American relatives, of that conversation that they have to have, especially with their boys. Not even when they're young men, when they just grow up and look like young men, but they have to reground them, but they have to prepare them for that struggle. So the maestra talks about that, the importance of knowing who you are, but having people around you that can reground you and help you, be able to speak the truth for social justice. Let's go on and listen to Maestra as she, begins to enlighten us more on the aspect of how we can heal, but ground ourselves in the sense of our sacred purpose as well.
I found, looking back, the Chicano movement that I was involved with was very political and social, but didn't have any spiritual aspect to it. And people got lost in that process. So I was looking for the spiritual, indigenous aspect, and that's what I found in Mexico and found here, and made that kind of connection, which gave me back a spiritual life that was not the institutional Catholic Church. I mean, I feel I can pray anywhere, but I like to pray outside. I like to pray with my redwood tree. It just, to me, nature is a manifestation of the Creator and of creation. And so that's what connects me, not only to all of that, but to other human beings. And then how did I end up doing the things I did in psychology and all of that? Well, I went back to school after I got divorced and got a master's in history and 20th century Mexican history. And then, they started organizing Chicano studies programs. And so I worked in the first Chicano studies program at San Jose Community College. So that got me into that kind of, and then, I taught for a time in ethnic studies at UC, Chicano studies. I was the second woman, but I was already in a different progression. They were kind of caught in, all Chicanos have to be socialists, right? And then they called me the cultural nativist or something, but I never went for any of those labels. I was just exploring everything and exploring it because I was always a little older than everybody, so I was a little always further ahead in the exploration of things, of just rediscovering. So I discovered a lot of things, interesting things in Chicano studies, because it was primarily all men, and they were still stuck in being men in a certain kind of way. So it was difficult for any woman that was in that group. But then later, it's an amazing thing. And they were supposed to be radicals, but they weren't radicals in their interaction with students or with their colleagues. Later, I had an opportunity to teach in the School of Social Work at UC. And that's a very, essentially, more conservative place. But they would leave you alone. If you did what you were supposed to do, and if the students respected what you were doing, there was no problem with what you would do. And that's kind of the difference when people haven't had time to reflect on who they truly were and what that meant if you were going to be a radical Chicano or Chicana, that it was both. But that wasn't happening at that time. And I think I taught at most, as an instructor in most universities around here. And then I decided, and then again, it was a new college here in San Francisco that claimed to be New College, a very open. And they asked me and a number of other people, an Asian woman and an African-American man, to come and look at their curricula in psychology to see if they were, doing a more appropriate kind of psychology. And we looked through everything and made some recommendations, and then they offered us a course to teach. And we said, well, there needs to be something more. We need to see what books are being read. What does other people's curricula look like? And then they said, oh, no, you can't do that. Academic freedom. And we said, well, if you want to make a change, if they're reading the same books and teaching the same theories, we're not in any different place. There's no cultural appropriateness here. And then I co-taught a class, and we decided, the other teacher was African-American, that we would bring in Afrocentric psychology to examine that. And then I'd have people come in from Northern Natives and from Chicanos and Latinos. And the class was pretty receptive. But then someone said, well, why don't you bring in a Jewish person? And I have to laugh. I mean, I could have been more, finessed it more. I said, well, why? Everything that is in the curricula is, if you look at the last names, it comes out of a theoretical framework that starts with Freud, and we're talking about something else. Well, that created an alarm with the powers that be there, and they said, well, maybe you should come back another time to teach. I said, I understand what you're saying. Well, people complained. I said, well, I was telling the truth as I saw it, and you wanted to have a different kind of emphasis. Well, it couldn't be there if you didn't have the materials. And so then that's when I decided I'm not going to play around anymore in these universities. I'll just do teaching in the community in however way people want me to do it. And that's what I've been doing, and I'm still doing.
As we listen to her teachings, once again, she reinforces the importance of a spiritual base, and talked about how when she experienced some of the movements, and especially she mentioned the Chicano movement and some of the other, that movement, and that there was a very strong political fight, and even against the Vietnam War and all of that, but that she didn't find that there was a strong spiritual base. And, from my living, the life of being around for that, the first uprising in the 60s, and then through the Rodney King era and now, and then dialoguing with elders of those movements, we recognize that the movements that took stronghold had a spiritual base. And she really advocates for that spiritual base as a necessary part of a political action as well. But that it's important also to know your history and to know your culture and to read the books, because the books that are given to us tell us a false history about who we are. We must know our authentic history, our authentic culture, and read about the social movements that have come before to help us prepare for that next phase of life and our next movement that we need to build. And so La Maestra, really emphasizes the sense of our cultural rootedness, our cultural knowledge, and our spiritual base as a grounding point for us moving together and moving along. In this next segment, she talks about how that the woundedness can get inside of us and get in our relationships, how it can affect the way our partner relationships, our family relationships, the colonized thinking that can get into to us as well. And so let's listen and see how we see it impacting us today.
Let's look at what it was like before the invasion of the Spanish and the French. How did men and women relate to each other? Was there one was better than the other? One was less than the other? And what I discovered that though you had very distinct roles, there was equal value to the role. And that's the difference. Yes, you were making the tortillas, but the husband went out and had to get the corn. And you couldn't do one without the other. But that shifted when the invasion came, because the Spaniard came with a different view of women, either put them away in the castle or not think of them as persons. And what happened was what I call the psychology of the oppressed, that you begin, which is a natural thing, you begin identifying with those who have power. And so if you were a man and saw the Spanish man doing whatever he wanted to do with whomever he wanted to do it with and treating women in a certain kind of way, then you adapted, not because you were bad or evil, but because you wanted to survive. That's bad things happen out of survival sometimes, and we can see it now. We see the people on the street doing certain things because their bottom line is to survive that day, right? So out of that survival, another capa, another layer came over our cultura, which was, it's not its true essence. And people say, well, that was 500 years ago or more. That's true. But in our DNA, we carry those other ways. I see it when I used to go out on the street more when I was at Instituto down to the corner, 24th and Mission, where one of the gangs hung out there. And, to talk to them and to let them know what offerings we had. And, they would always, of course, I was older, but, I held my ground with them because I would say, okay, you're hanging out and you tell me this is your turf here. Okay. I said, I can claim all of it, every corner. And I said, but if you claim it as your turf, you should take care of it and take care of the people that come through here. When the viejita comes by, why don't you offer to carry her bags? Oh, but we've tried that. But, they look at us, este modo y el otro. I said, of course, because you're standing there in a position of power and mad dogging everybody. I said, how old are you? 15? I'm not afraid of you. I can slap you down, right? They would use humor, right? And I also found that any time that we went out, when there was a shooting or something happening in the community, we'd go out with the smoke and a little drum and go to wherever it happened with sometimes with the danzantes if they could, sometimes not. And we would pray. And we would clean that space. And inevitably, there always been some young little bato, what's that stuff that what's that stuff that you're doing? I said, that stuff is you. And we'd get into a little, at first they'd kind of look, but they were drawn to the smoke, or they were drawn to the drum beat. And that comes from 500 years of carrying all that inside of us.
So Maestra talks about in this segment, that even some of the false ways that have come into our culture that have affected male-female relationships. She talks about misogyny and when the Europeans came, that they introduced a different way of how we should relate to each other, how we see each other as males and females, how we see elders as different, and how we see children different. That the Europeans had a whole different way of looking at valuing people, and there was a hierarchical system of valuing people as well. She called it the psychology of the oppressed, the colonized thinking. And she says to us that we also have that now in us. And it's important that we spend time healing, decolonizing, detoxifying from those ways and learning our true sacred ways, that the sacredness is still in our DNA, that is there, but we have the wounds there as well. So this process of healing really is about weeding our gardens, weeding the oppressive ways and the indoctrinated, colonized toxicity that is in us. And that's really important even in our movements, even in the work that we do and how we approach the work as well. But she mentioned something real interesting. Even in the wounds, we end up having to respond to the woundedness. And she shares a story about when someone had died and there was a violence and a death, and in our tradition we go out and take the medicine out there, take the traditions out there, and maybe even take the danza out there, right? And she lit some copal and some sage and offered some prayers, for the families that were struggling, and that there was a youngster out there that says, "Well, what is that? What is that smoke?" And she says to him, "You are the smoke." So, "Well, what is that dance you guys did?" "Oh, you are that dance." "Well, what is that medicine?" He says, "You are that medicine." "Well, what are these ways?" And she said, "You are the ways." So she reminded that youngster that stuff is in you. It's there. And it's important for us to recognize that in spite of the woundedness and the colonization, and in spite of even some of these ways that we've picked up that are not healthy for us, that it's never too late, that we recognize that we have the strength within us, within our culture. All of these things exist right there before us. So let's listen to the maestra again as she talks to us then about what do we need to do, how do we heal ourselves, in sometimes this very toxic and very oppressive world.
As my understanding of it, and as it's developed, that universally within each culture, there are elements and activities that have been used traditionally to take care of oneself, to heal oneself, both physically as well as spiritually, as well as emotionally. Those ways we know, but have forgotten or have been taught. And I still do trainings with interns that are in social work and psychology. And a lot of them now are in PhD programs, and they come, all eager. And the first thing I have to tell them is, I'm not going to talk about anything that you're learning in school. We're going to talk about what you need to learn to work with the people, to explore that, because the theories that come out of Western psychology come out of that culture. It's natural, it grows, but they're not all universal. There are many things that are specific to a culture. And so, for us, I think the spiritual is essential to our cultura. And so we have to be healed from only being in our heads and take a walk down to our heart, right? And it's a long walk sometimes, particularly if you've been in school a long time. I mean, that's why I had to go to Mexico, to 10,000 miles up, to find that again. Because otherwise we do damage to the people. Help the people. And I don't know if you met, he probably met Tlacaele when he was here. And one of the things that he said to us one time, he says, remember, you are the medicine, right? And that's what I say to people. You are the medicine. The medicine is within you. And then sometimes you need a little help to get it out, someone to help trigger that memory again.
One of the things that that I remember in this interview is the powerful teaching of that she presents of taking a walk from your head to your heart. And that sometimes, that is a painful walk because we carry many different things in our heart, blessings and love, but also sometimes hurts that we have to heal from, and that healing energy that we carry within us is so important. And when I think about, how we manifest that in our relationships and how, what is the teachings that we want to give our kids and our grandchildren, and especially right now, because it's a very difficult time. How do we teach our children, our grandchildren, to persevere, to stay strong? What are the things that we want them to know and them to integrate in their lives as we move forward? We end the segment. She says something about anger, and I ask her about that anger. About that anger. What is that anger about? And she's going to talk to us about how she's converted that anger into love.
If you are present in the ceremony without trying to analyze it, too much analysis is paralysis. It's like without trying to analyze, why are they doing that? Just to be so present that you can feel the energy. Because I haven't mentioned that, but healing is about energy. So that as you and I talk, there's an energy that's moving. There's an energy with the young man. There's an energy with you. There's an energy with the camera as well. And it's that energy that goes from one person to another that is healing. It's the energy in a relationship. So when, say I'm doing therapy, I could use any theoretical framework, but it's the relationship that I develop with that person that's going to make that possible for that person to find that healing. And I'm just an instrument. I don't say, well, one can do this. There's energy that goes. So, in conventional psychology, Western psychology, if you're going to be a therapist, they talk about you have to be careful, don't touch people. Don't overstep this boundary. Don't have pictures on your wall that can identify something about yourself. And I said, that's crazy. Because we know, we, as a cultura, we touch each other. And in that touching, we are sending energy. So we do have to be careful how we're feeling when we're touching somebody. When you're doing a massage, you know that, all right? And if someone's going to touch us, I've had to sometimes jump back because I can feel something from that person that I don't want. Or the same in our voice, how we use our voice. Does it manifest kindness? All right, o siempre estamos gritando. How does it feel? I think you've told stories, ¿verdad, about that of, it's not the words. I used to work with a young man whose every other word was the F word. I go, come on, that's boring. Well, I'm sorry. I said, hey, I've heard them in probably 10 different languages, but it's not the word, it's the force, it's the energy that comes with that word that's damaging to people. So if we're doing talking therapy, we have to be very careful of our voice and think about what we're saying. Is it necessary? Is it useful? Is it helpful? Is it kind? In whatever we do, is it kind?
Today, I just, want to really recognize, all those elders that have come before us and the ancestors that stand with us, that are still with us, that all we have to do is just take a deep breath, maybe sing a sacred song, maybe play a drum, maybe a hymn, something that reminds us of our cultural ways. Sometimes we just have to be still and in our spiritual center, just call to those ancient ones. And some of you may not know them by name, but they are with you. And the Maestra reminds us of that. So as we begin, this journey of recovering our sacredness and healing generations, I call to you to take time to reflect on what is the medicine within you. what are those blessings that you carry? And what are the teachings that your ancestors have taught you, even sometimes in difficult times and many times in the most of difficult times? And so I ask you to love yourself and to love those people around you and to love who you are in all that it brings. That you come from a sacred root, you come from sacred people, and we come from sacred traditions. At the same time, we recognize that that rootedness can help us. It can help us advocate and help us go out there and demand the racial equity and the social justice that we all deserve, that is part of all of us that way. So we left off by asking her, so how did you transform that anger? Because she talked about that she was angry for a while and transformed it into love. And so I'm eager to play this and to hear her, but invite you to open your hearts and open your minds as we listen to Maestra Concha Saucedo.
How did I get? Yes, I was out in the street like this. And I was good. I mean, I wasn't, it was like theater to me. It was like drama, you know. Esa fuerza that it came from that. And now, as you asked me, I said, I think the greatest energy comes from love. And how did that happen? It took a long time. And I was telling you, maybe 20 years ago, I was still angry, but I could modulate it better. But then I was asked by a relative of my family, that's a sister, if I would come and do a weekend workshop for the Latino sisters and the African American sisters, because they were having trouble in their order because they felt they couldn't worship the way they wanted to, you know, singing the songs that they were accustomed to, different things. So at first I thought, I don't want to do that, because I had negative memories of going to school with those nuns, and I didn't want to be around them. And then, well, this is a family member, right, that's asking you. So I said, well, maybe it's time to do that. And when I went to this workshop, I, talked about cultura cura, talked about our values and different things. And they had placed a very old sister next to me who was hard of hearing. And then I was talking about the experiences I had had as a young person and what had happened to children in the school. And she started to cry. And what did I say or do here? And then she said, if I had known what you talked about, I would have done things differently with the children. She was from Los Angeles. So I imagine she was talking about Chicano children. And so that kind of opened something in me. It healed something, because she was so authentic. She was so authentic. And she didn't know any better. She was a little old white nun, and she had learned what they all had learned or had been taught, or had tried to make sense of what she saw and made sense of it in a different way. And that was about 20 years ago. So from that time on, it softened me up again. I'm saying soften me up in the sense that you have strength, but it's mellow, it's soft, it's like Jell-O. I love Jell-O, Arturo Carrillo, that song that we do with drumming. And the more I explore my own experience and how I'm feeling now, that I feel good. I feel feliz, happy. And I say that comes from feeling love. And I'm fortunate that I have family all around me, and good comadres, compadres, young people who seek me out. I enjoy young people a lot. Teenagers and early 20s. I'm reminded of one who called me up once and says, "Can I come and chop it up?" And I go, "What are you going to chop up?" Oh, can you explain it to me? He just laughed and laughed. And he had had a very, very difficult life. And now he's in such a good place. But the other thing was, it wasn't just me working with him. It was a group of people, all really giving him love, showing him that he could love. through experiencing love that someone gives you, regardless of what, you learn to love yourself. So it's a slow process because it's so easy nowadays to be angry because there are things that are hurtful and harmful that are going on in all over the world.
Wow, what some beautiful teachings. The Maestra really talks a lot about how the powerful energy of love, that love is really the most powerful healing energy, but also, begins to talk about a mantra and be important for us to incorporate in our spirits, that we have to, build that mantra of that we are important, that we are loved, that we are sacred, that we are a blessing, that we must say that to ourselves and fortify ourselves, if you will, to build our energy and our spirit and our aura, because we often live in a world that doesn't give us those messages of beauty and love and recognize our sacredness and recognize our medicine. So the Maestra talks about that, but she also talks about how the woundedness sometimes can get into, our relationships, our male-female relationships, and how it's important for us to even release and cleanse from wounded ways in order that we can recapture those ways that are sacred to who we are and sacred to our to the essence of who we are. So let's continue the dialogue and continue the listening as the Maestra talks to us, just about that development and recovering, and even to we ask her the question about what are the messages you would want to share our next generations of grandchildren to carry on. What is important in that, and she shares some very powerful teachings that way.
I want all grandchildren to enjoy their lives and to enjoy their grandparents for what their grandparents bring with them. I think all grandparents have a vision and have something to offer their grandchildren, except people don't communicate too much anymore with all the aparatos, right? And I would ask the grandchildren to really look at your grandparents and reach out to them, have a conversation with them, ask them about their life, because we like to talk about our lives and what we're learning. And in doing so, the relationship will be strengthened. And they will ask you questions and they will learn, from that. And, what I want for all children is to have a good life, a healthy life, and to have a lot of love in their life. And to find that, you have to love. They themselves have to love themselves and others, and all the plants, and all the trees, and all the dogs, and all the cats, and all the animals. Because they also give, we forget what we call pets have a spirit. And sometimes we are imponiendo. I don't like to see animals all dressed up, because they don't do that. They already have their fur, their skin. They don't have to bother with that. There's so much, but really, I'll quote a Tibetan proverb that when Tibetans were asked, and I feel there's a lot of parallel between the Tibetan philosophy and our own in terms of how to be in the world. And when asked, how do you live a good and healthy life? The answer was, eat half what you eat, walk twice what you walk, laugh thrice what you laugh, and love without measure. I think that para nosotros, el amor no tiene color. El amor no tiene color. And love, I'd say to the grandchildren, don't put conditions on your love. Or I would say that to men, right? Don't, if you wear your hair this way, or if, some men are very controlling. They want to change the woman. Well, changing the woman means they don't love the woman as she is. So then we have to love ourselves as we are and then try to make ourselves better if we want to be better. I think all children should talk more. They get a certain age and they don't want to talk to the adults, or to the elders. They did when they were little. So they can do it again. There's so much to gain, so much laughter, so much wonder. I think the other thing I would say, don't lose wonder. Look up at the sky. On a day like this in San Francisco, look up at the sky. It's beautiful. There may be clouds floating around, and it's beautiful. Because that wonder then gives us, nourishes our spirit. It's never boring. People ask me sometimes, now that you've retired, well, I've never retired from anything. I mean, I left a particular position, but I retire? No. I'm eager. What's the next project? What can I get into? Where can I sing and dance? That's what I loved going to work at Instituto, that I could be myself, literally, and sing and dance, literally, and tell bad jokes, right? And there'd always be someone to laugh. So it's like, just live your life fully with care, and live your life in such a way that you care for others, and using care in that way of meaning love, and that you show that to others, and that you find ways to express it.
In this final segment, La Maestra, really enforces the significance of healing. She says, because sometimes those wounds can turn to anger and they can turn to hate. So she quotes this Tibetan philosophy that says, eat half as much, and we're a consumption society that sometimes eat too much. And she says, walk twice as much, and that in that walking, for some people, that is also meditation and prayer. And then she says, laugh 3 times as much, right? And that laughter and that joy and that pleasure. And that's why in many of our cultures, we like to dance, we like to party, we like to joke, and we like to have fun, because that's medicine too. And she reminds us that even in the struggle, even in our healing, even, in this tough time, that we need to make room for that laughter, for that joy, for the dance, for the singing. When I'm with the Babas and the Brotherhood of Elders, and Baba Greg begins to play those drums, there's a vibration that begins to stimulate. And it's not just the drum beat. It's a vibration that is, really generations old. And when he begins to chant, I feel the energy of that chant that is, generations old, and we begin to feel the spirit. So we know that laughing and playing and dancing, the danza, the music, the art is important. And then she shares the teaching in love without measure. Y no tiene color. It doesn't have color. It has no boundaries. So, Maestra shares with us the importance of that, and of healing ourselves, and knowing how to release, how to let things go when it's necessary to let them go. Because holding on to toxicity too long it becomes part of you. And so we want to have these methods to be able, in our culture and our traditions can help us that way. This last segment, Maestra, really just focuses on healing, just on that, the important part of healing. The central part of the work that we do is on healing. And so let's listen and see this parting advice that she gives us.
Well, first of all, make sure you have healed those wounds. The cicatrice may not be there yet, but if you know you have wounds, you have to be careful that those wounds don't become the filter for you. And to take care of yourselves. And I mean physically as well as emotionally and spiritually, because when we're not feeling well, our energy will be disturbed and out of balance. So that if we're going to do any kind of action that is a healing action, whether it's a temescal or a limpia, make sure that you're okay, that your mind is okay, that your heart is okay, because in that process, you will be taking on what the person is feeling. And so then you have to know how to release that so it doesn't stay with you. And to recognize that sometimes you can't do it. And depending how, strong or, however your feelings are, but that it's okay. That we aren't like magicians, that we can turn it on. And that we need that time. Sometimes we do so many things and they're all in that relationship of healing with a lot of other people, and one becomes depleted of energy. So it's important to have someone that you can go to, or a place that you can go. Sit under the tree just to feel that energy, to replenish that energy. And sometimes, because we're so committed and dedicated, and someone asks for help, and they're desperate, you feel you have to do it immediately, but sometimes we can't. And then we have to say, okay, who else might be able to do this? And be open enough to recognize that I'm not the only one. Or to work in tandem with people. I do work with other women, some of the Mayan women that are here, or other women who are on this path as well. And we get together informally, not meetings with agenda, but just to apoyar, or to ask each other questions. And what can I do in the situation? What should I not do? All of those things, because we're all fallible.
What a blessing to be able to listen to an elder that has walked this path, has walked this journey and faced the challenges, but still at 85, I'm visiting her. When you walk in her presence, you feel light, you feel that love, you feel that energy. And it was such a blessing just to be there with her, to see that la cultura cura, that healing energy manifested. And I believe we have elders like that in every community. They're not recognized. We have grandmas and big mamas and aunties and even uncles and grandfathers too, because the males carry that energy too. And they're in every community. And one of the things that is important for us to strive to do is to recognize them and acknowledge them. And sometimes their blessing is just a greeting, but it's difficult in these times that, you sometimes all you see in people are their frustration or their anger. We don't really recognize, that underneath the anger and the frustration, and sometimes the intolerance, because people get tired. A lot of people are just tired of the injustice and tired of the racism, And I think back of my mom, as I mentioned before, I grew up in Compton, and we grew up in an era where, I was in school, high school, when the first uprisings happened in the 60s. And so I felt the anger, and I felt the injustice, and I saw the burning buildings and the looting, and then National Guard came, and they posted themselves in our neighborhoods. And there was a tank right there in the corner of my house, and had people with AK-47s just standing out there posting up. And we go to school, they'd mad dog us and intimidate us, and they'd intimidate the girls. And so all that energy that you felt, it didn't help us. It didn't make us feel more safe. It scared us more. But one of the things that did happen is that my mom, she owned a cleaners. She had a cleaners there in we'd call Watts, right there near Manchester and Broadway. And my mom, I remember as a young kid getting ready to go to school, my mom would be up early in the morning, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. She'd get up and she'd begin cooking, fresh beans and rice and fresh tortillas, and then making chile verde or carne asada. And I remember getting up and saying, "Mom, what are you doing? Why are you up so early? I got to cook." "Why do you got to cook?" "Well, I got to take food to the cleaners." "Why?" "God, well, because people they want to eat and want, And I'm thinking, why are you giving them food? I was a young kid. You're taking the food, man. I want at least some here for me. And I was a kid, man. I was, youngster, didn't know all these teachings and all of that. And she said, be quiet. And she'd go and, go to work. And after school, I had to go to the cleaners to help work and be a presser in the cleaners there. And I'd walk in, and there'd be people there in the back, and you could tell that some of them were disheveled, homeless, and one of the person you knew dealt drugs, and another was a minister, and they're all sitting there in the back. And I was saying, "Mom, why do you let these people in the back in our shop? They're going to steal our clothes. She says, "Hey, don't worry, they're my friends. No, but they're going to rip off." And I'm thinking, trying to take care of my mom, I worry about my mom, but she had a whole different view. She would feed them burritos and give them whatever they wanted to eat, and I said, "Mom, they're just taking advantage of you. Be quiet. You don't understand nothing." And so she would do this, but the riots happened, and
And they were burning buildings and all on the block where my mom's cleaners was. And we were watching on the news all those buildings burning, and my mom began to cry because she says, they're going to burn the shop down, and I'm not going to be able to feed you guys. What am I going to do? How am I going to support, us? And she began to cry, and she was very sad. And she says, well, maybe they won't burn my machine, my sewing machine. Maybe if I can just I can bring it home and do work from here. And, mom trying to think and strategize. As a single mom at that time, my dad had, already passed on. And well, a few days passed, and finally, the burning and the looting had stopped, and they allowed us to go back in that area. And my mom says, well, let's go, let's see what I can get. What's left? Maybe machine is left. And, so we drove over there, and my mom drove, and I was there with her. And as we approached, her block, we saw all these buildings, burned and looted and torn up and everything like that. And so we approached there and got to the block where her shop was. She looked over and she looked at me, and then she parked in front, and my mom's cleaners wasn't burnt. And she says, look, they didn't burn. And she got out, and I got out, and we went to the front door, and she went to unlock the front door, and there was a piece of paper on the door that was taped on there. And it said, thank you, Miss Jessie, for feeding us and for loving and taking care of us. And my mom began to cry. And she looked at me and says, yes, you see, they're good people. They take care of me. They take care of me. And I learned a very big lesson that day, that underneath the anger and the frustration are good people, that all they want is someone to honor them and acknowledge them and feed them, but to see them. And underneath that is they will take care of you and they will love you. I learned from my mom that we're all as one. And later on in my culture, I learned in the Mayan language, en la quech, tú eres mi otro yo, you are my other me. Where you hurt, I hurt. Where you heal, I heal. We're interconnected that way. So today we're in mourning for a lot of people that have died, and because of COVID-19, but we're also in mourning because of, our brothers and sisters that have died to police violence, and to all the relatives that are mourning. But also many of us are in mourning because of the injustice, tired. People are tired. And many people are angry too. But that interconnectedness is what's going to get us through. The interconnectedness of us walking together and speaking truth together and fighting together, but loving together and healing together. So we thank you for joining us. We want to acknowledge you and everything that you do, all those, especially the youngsters, the young ones that are out there protesting and, sharing voice and sharing truth, for all those advocates that are out there that have done it for years, for those elders that have been, really carrying this justice flag for many generations. We thank all of you and those that are the first responders and that are in hospitals or places of care, but also the farm workers and the people that are feeding us and the people that are taking care of us and keeping us safe as well. We thank all of you. And for those of you that are healing and caring for those people, the healers and the caretakers, we thank you. Let me remind you to take care of yourself and love yourself and honor yourself and take some time for yourself, And as we go on this journey, we're all healing together. We're all healing, but let us not forget to enjoy life too. To take time to laugh, and that's why we like to party and dance, because that's part of the healing. Use that music, use those songs, use those rhythms, use those prayers, use those rituals to heal yourself and fortify yourself, because our goal is to heal generations, but it also is so that the next generations have more blessings and more beauty and love themselves more and have less pain and struggle. Thank you all, and many blessings to you. Ometio.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.